Vic DeCiccio, the director of the Institute for Computer Research, and I'm really happy to be introducing my friend Ron Baecker. Ron's a professor of computer science at the University of Toronto, and he's a fixture in computer science in Canada for sure. All his degrees are from MIT. He currently holds the Bell University Laboratories Chair in Human-Computer Interaction at U of T. And he's also the founder and I think the chief scientist of the Knowledge Media Design Institute, which is about 10 years old or so at University of Toronto, a multidisciplinary institute. Last year he spent roughly half a year as a visiting professor in cognitive neuroscience at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons, which really impresses me. It's always impressive to me when a computer scientist is working with doctors. He's also the principal investigator and the motivator behind an NSERC research network called the Network for Effective Collaboration Technologies Through Advanced Research, or NECTAR, which I think is in about half or two-thirds of the way through its five-year span. He's also received great recognition for a lifetime of achievement in several areas. For example, he's been named one of the 60 pioneers of computer graphics by ACM SIGGRAPH. He's been elected to the Chi Academy by ACM SIG-Chi. And he's founded and run 2 software companies. And he's one of the early Unix pioneers in Canada, and also created the first computer graphics animated film I ever saw called Sorting Out Sorting. So currently he distributes and supports ePresence, which is partially what he's going to talk about today. It's an interactive media system which he's applied to e-learning and also medical education. Interesting features of ePresence include the ability to webcast to many people, but also video conference with relatively fewer people. The ability to provide good awareness of the remote audience in the room. And also the ability to achieve persistent conversation over webcasts in, for example, learning communities. So after that kind of lengthy but well-deserved introduction, I'll turn you over to Ron.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Vic. It's a great pleasure to be here at Waterloo. It's a great pleasure to be talking to all of you and to have this talk broadcast worldwide using ePresence. How many of you are faculty here, just to get a sense of, okay, how many of you are grad students? How many are undergrads? Okay, mostly in computer science or related disciplines? Okay, all right. If there are any grad students or particularly undergraduates interested in graduate work at U of T, try to chat with me today or tomorrow, perhaps after this talk, and I can tell you about it. The Human-Computer Interaction Group at U of T consists of myself, Ravin Balakrishnan, who works on interaction techniques and input devices, and Kai Trong, who's a young Ubicomp guy. And you'll get a sense of my interest today, and I have another talk tomorrow discussing some of my interests in medical applications. But today I'm going to talk about some of the research issues that underlie the work that we've been doing with the ePresence system that Vic made reference to. This work represents the work of a lot of people. Here are some of the key players of the ePresence development team. Most importantly, Peter Wolf, who's been the chief architect of this system for the last 6.5 years. And as Vic mentioned, we're very grateful for support from NSERC, with some support from Microsoft, Smart Technologies, and others. which has allowed a bunch of us at 6 universities across the country to do some research on collaboration technologies. And the 4 individuals that you see there are the team of faculty together with some of their students who work on e-presence related research. The message today is that what I call highly interactive webcasting is a viable method for the distribution, publishing, and creation of knowledge. But despite the fact that there are technologies from us and a number of commercial vendors that allow you to webcast, there's still many, many interesting research problems and many, many interesting and important applications. And I'm going to try to give you a sense of both. Firstly, by talking about some of the research precursors to our work, then by introducing the technology, presence, interactive media, briefly describing some applications, talking about research directions and questions and discussion. I've been asked to have you hold questions to the end. I will do my best to finish in about 45 to 50 minutes so that we have time for questions, and certainly I know some of you may have to go for class at 3:30. I can stay longer and chat with you. Okay, what is presence? Well, if you go to the Oxford English Dictionary, there are a number of definitions. The state of being in the same place with a person or thing. And we start to talk about e-presence, electronic presence. We relax the notion that you have to be in the same place, or we generalize it into a virtual place. The second definition talks about a vague sense of the place or space which immediately surrounds the person. And again, one of our goals is to enrich and enhance that sense of place, that sense of space, that sense of being connected with other people. We have barely scratched the surface with that. Our goal of establishing really good e-presence is an ongoing activity, and in the Research Frontiers section, I'll talk to you about some of the work we've done in the last year or two that are pushing us closer to that. This work fits under a term called media spaces. If you go into the CSCW literature, you'll see media spaces talked about quite a bit. And media spaces are computer-controlled AV communications environments for synchronous remote collaboration. And here we're very much interested in linking people together through multimedia communications over the internet in real time. But the notion of what you do past real time after the event has always been very, very important to e-presence. We've used from the start the technology called webcasting. And webcasting, many of you are familiar with webcasting. It's more typically used with just audio, and it's delivering streaming audio or streaming audio and video over the internet in real time to be viewed with a web browser on any PC. And so the goal of e-presence was to allow you to broadcast learning events such as this over the internet to as large a number of people as possible. And because of the goal of making it accessible to large numbers of people, we chose the technology of webcasting rather than the technology of conferencing. Webcasting has the disadvantage that because the streaming media engines buffer the transmission in order to provide you a smooth viewing effect somewhere elsewhere in the world, independent of the exact way in which the packets get sent over the internet, you're not in real time. Typically, you're seeing it 15, 20, 25 seconds later. This limits but doesn't preclude interaction. And so one of our challenges all along has been how do we build as much interactivity and engagement into an e-presence event as possible, despite the fact that our technology is primarily webcasting. And as you'll see later on in the talk, we've done a number of things within the webcasting paradigm, but now we're starting to also integrate conferencing capabilities directly into e-presence. The other thing we're very interested in is the notion of community formation, the notion that people who watch some sort of learning event, whether it's in a classroom situation or whether it's in a more distributed kind of learning situation have something in common with other people. And so one of our goals is to enable them to communicate with other people, not only during the event, but afterwards over viewings of the archived presentations. So very briefly, I'm going to try to pay a debt in past work to some past work. Like so many things in the field of CSCW, a man named Doug Engelbart has to be credited. Engelbart did the demo to top all demos. I think it was in 1967 at the one of the joint computer conferences. And in that, he demonstrated live point-to-point video conferencing, desktop sharing, hypertext, mice, et cetera, just a dazzling demo. But after that demo, things sort of got put aside for about 10 years, and then in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s, work started again at a number of places, and I'm just going to briefly mention some of those places. The first place that really took this notion seriously, like so many things in interactive computing, was the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. And partly driven by Dell Goldberg, the Palo Alto Research Center at Dell's group at Park split into two. I think the story was that some people wanted to move to Portland or were moving to Portland, and so they had a distributed laboratory. And they were able to show, even despite the crudeness of the communications technology at that point, that they could support a distributed community of researchers, including having Christmas parties with people at both sites looking at one another across the video link. Not ideal, but again, if people happen to live in both sites, you could do it. Both Xerox PARC and Rank Xerox Europark then built more complete media spaces in the late 80s and early 90s, and they supported up to 30 researchers in a single site with desktop video conferencing. And you'll see a sense of that in another, the slide after next, where I show an image that actually comes from Toronto, but it was very much inspired by early work done in the Xerox labs. Marilyn Manti, Bill Buxton, and I then had two projects, Cave Cat and the Ontario Telepresence Project, in which we explored desktop video conferencing applications, software, shared drawing and writing tools, and a number of other things that were quite interesting. And here's a couple of shots from that era. Up in the image that covers the screen is from the portholes system. This was something when you came into your office, you could see who among the researchers on the Ontario Telepresence Project was at their desk at that time. And this was a first generation or second generation awareness server, again, giving you a sense of who was out there you could communicate with. When you log into instant messaging clients now, you see something very similar, although typically without the graphics. On the upper right, you see a prototype of something called Hydra, which was an attempt in Bill Buxton's Telepresence project to deal with some of the clues that you have in a face-to-face meeting that don't come across when there's simply a single screen in a point-to-point video conference. Because if I was sitting around a meeting room, you would get a lot of clues by my turning my head, talking to the person on my right and the person on your left. That typically is missing from video conferencing. That's one of the reasons it doesn't really feel quite real. You don't have a good sense of presence. And in this prototype designed by the industrial designer John Arnott, who you see in the picture, this was called Hydra. And assuming that you were talking to three people, you could array their images on your desk. And so again, you would have some of these head turning and gaze awareness clues that are missing in typical video conferencing. The first organization to experiment with broader distribution of educational events was Ellen Isis and John Tang at Sun with the forum system, and they delivered, and it says their internet broadcasting of lectures. That's That's not quite correct. It was over their internal Ethernet, but they delivered lectures around Sun Labs and basically came up with the conclusion that, yes, this was a great thing for people who couldn't make the event, but instructors didn't really quite like it as much as looking face-to-face at much of their audience, although they started experimenting in the forum system with computerized polls, so you could at least say, how many of you agree with this, don't agree, et cetera, et cetera. Larry Rowe at Berkeley in the mid-90s took these ideas very seriously and built a remarkable system at Berkeley, which still runs today, called the Berkeley Internet Broadcasting System, BIBS. And they were webcasting using real media only to dozens of classes, although most of the use at Berkeley was not for viewing the classes in real time. Most of the use was watching the archives, particularly before exams, where the viewings of the archives went way up. And what was interesting is that unlike Toronto, I can't speak about Waterloo, but unlike Toronto, Berkeley took the notion seriously that if you wanted to use this technology, you had to invest a little bit of infrastructure in automating classrooms and putting in robotic cameras, 3 cameras per class, in running coax from those rooms to a centralized control station. And when I visited there about 4 or 5 years ago, Larry said that they were able to do this with several dozen classes per term with a personnel investment of sort of a half of a full-time undergraduate or the equivalent in order to support this, which I thought was actually quite remarkable. And this continues to this day, even though Larry retired a number of years ago. And this gives you some example of the software that they've developed and continue to use at Berkeley. Microsoft Research is the new Xerox PARC, in that sort of everything that is important in computer science research manifests itself one way or another among the 1,000 or so researchers spread across 6 labs in Microsoft. Microsoft had a project called TELUP in which they were webcasting lectures. I know they still record lectures, whether they're still webcasting them. I think they're still webcasting them around the campus. But what's interesting is they also experimented with a wall display, which you see on the next slide, in which you could get a sense in the lecture hall of who's out there. And the people out there could be viewed as an outline if they didn't want you to see anything about their picture except their name. You could see a still picture, or you could see a video stream. And the video streams on this scale of display didn't seem to work terribly well in their room. We're starting to experiment with similar things now in our project. And then 2 other projects. This was a remarkable prototype. I never actually saw it, just read about it. This was a educational prototype built by a PhD student named Chen, I believe was his name, at Stanford, and he built a wall display consisting of 24 individual video conferencing links with 3 sections of the wall, each which had a camera and a speaker to give you, again, a sense of eye contact and a sense of looking in one direction or another, a la Hydra. And to my knowledge, this system was not commercialized or taken further other than a research prototype. And then finally, in terms of something different, Gregory Abott at Georgia Tech did a wonderful project that the research project is dead. I believe that the follow-ons are still in use at Georgia Tech, in which the emphasis was not on live webcasting, but the emphasis on what could you capture from a large electronic whiteboard, including not only slides, but instructor gesturing and markup across the slides. And in fact, sharing that with students with their own desktop computers and letting them mark up the slides as well, and capturing all that and publishing archives. And the importance of the archives, again, which also was illustrated or emphasized by the Berkeley experience, is something that's that's influenced our approach with ePresence. And what's interesting about Greg's work is that it has perhaps the most thorough evaluation study of use by 5 schools, 35 instructors, 130 courses, et cetera, which should be a lesson to all of us. Okay, so I'm going to talk about our technology, which we call ePresence Interactive Media. The idea is to be able to capture rich media, and that means not only the audio-video of the instructor, but the slides, capture a desktop if I'm doing a live demo, et cetera, et cetera. We're building in conferencing. I'll get to that in a moment. But the important thing that's always characterized ePresence from the very beginning is the notion that we wanted archives that are very, very flexible. They're structured, navigable, and searchable, and I'll explain what I mean by those terms in more detail later. It's very cross-platform. It's highly scalable. We also generate output for podcasts. And as our distribution strategy, and you can look at it 2 ways. You can think of it, well, I just wasn't willing to start another company, having done 2 of them. But also, I wanted to experiment with a very non-traditional way of technology transfer. The traditional way of tech transfer that we're told is gospel at U of T is that you license it through the tech transfer office. They find a company. The company puts it all and makes it all as proprietary as possible, and et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, I don't know, maybe Waterloo's different. I know Waterloo's different. Waterloo has made money from some of its software entrepreneurs. But U of T, I don't think, has ever made any money. And it seemed to me we should try a different way. So we're actually trying to keep this project within the university and build a revenue model around it and release the software open source and community source. I'll explain what we mean by community source later in response to questions. And this results in something that's affordable, very flexible, and in fact one of the reasons I'm here is to talk to Dominic Covey about some projects in which ePresence ideally can be integrated with some software packages here. It's also easily localizable for different languages. Okay, you can split it then into 2 aspects. What can we do in terms of live webcast, pushing this out in real time right now, and what can we do with the archives? And so for live, as I said, we have real-time video with synchronized slides. We can also send audio only if for bandwidth reasons or if you want to capture an event and you don't have a video card. But we can also do live screen capture for software demos and web tours. Historically, interaction to our webcast has been through text questions. And I don't know, where's the ePresence moderator? The ePresence moderator is up there. How many people are on? 3. Okay. Oh, well. Anyway, maybe some of those 3 people will have questions, and those questions can come in via text. I'll describe later how we allow interaction through voice over IP. The on-demand functionality gives us the ability to navigate and search the archives, to search an individual archive or an entire repository, and the ability to bookmark, tag, and share different aspects of an event. So if there's something that you think your buddy in another university should look at, or your collaborator down the hall, you can bookmark it, and you can tag it, and you can send an email or post it, and I'll show you, actually I'm not going to show you the details today. I'm giving an informal discussion tomorrow that I'll show actually how you do that. So this is a typical interface for a live webcast. It can look dramatically different because everybody tailors their own skins and puts their own look and feel on this. But this is one in which you would see the live video stream on the upper left, a list of the people on, and I can't see, let's see how many, it looks like 20 or 30 online there. The slides in the upper right, the text chat down in the bottom, and various ways in which you can ask questions. So that's typical controls for a live webcast. This is the look of a couple of archives. What you see there is a recent screenshot of the top level of our website at CAMDI. So you see, for example, there's a talk that Kelly Rankin gave back in July 2003. I happen to know that we went in and edited the slides and put in more recent screen captures to make it more up to date. But the audio is exactly the same as it was given in July 2003. That talk has actually been viewed 17,000 times in the last 3.5 years. And that gives you some sense of the reach. I gave a talk, what is that? That's 15 months ago in Orlando, Florida, that it's staggering, has been viewed 4,300 times in the last. And over on the left, you see some of the website for University of Toronto at Mississauga. This is what navigating and viewing an archive looks like. Now, this interface hasn't actually been released yet. This is part of 3.4. It's just we're running it in prototype form on our website. And so what you see here, and Dominic, I think you guys will like this. This is a new interface that shows, remember I talked about hierarchical structure, structured and navigable. The hierarchical structure is 2 levels, so we have chapters, like intro is a chapter, ePresence Live is a chapter, and you see those marked on the upper timeline, and then the lower level are the slides. You see they marked on the lower timeline. This shows you something about the timing of this, and this are minutes and seconds. You have a zoom control, slide controls. You can move the slides independently of the speaker. So if you want to go back and look at 3 slides ago because there was something you didn't understand, you can do that while the speaker continues on. And again, we've got a live video stream here. I'm sorry, I'm talking about the archive. This is not live. These are slide controls. Move forward, back to the back, or the beginning and the end, and then tagging it and sharing it down there. You can also search, and there's 2 kinds of search. There's local search within an individual talk, and this is bizarre. It looks like he searched for OP, sort of strange thing to search for, but the red lines indicate every place where that word OP appeared on one of the slides. Right now we cannot search in the voice track. We can only search in the slide titles, in the slide text, the chapter titles, and we can actually, if you have a certain card that does OCR on the slides, we can actually search for text within images as well. So this is a local search, and this, again, the difference, this is a search here within a particular repository at one site, and this is using the ePresence global directory. So this searches all the ePresence systems we know about all over the world and looks for a particular word that appears in one of those talks. This is actually, I actually came up with a collaborator for one of my medical projects about a 1.5 years ago by just happening to search for Alzheimer's disease or something like that in the Faculty of Medicine repository, and discovered somebody I knew, but I didn't know we shared mutual interest, and found a collaborator for a project this way. And one of our projects is to increase the amount of worldwide collaboration in terms of posting and sharing media resources in this way. Historically, we provided just software. We are an open source software project, but a number of the adopters of our software kept saying to us, gee, wouldn't it be nice if instead of us putting together our own hardware and then installing the software, we probably have to buy hardware for this anyway. Wouldn't it be nice if you shipped us a hardware box? And after a little bit of nudging, we said, okay, we'll ship you a hardware box. So we now ship the ePresence Media Station 100, which comes pre-configured with the software, and there will be some other hardware products coming out soon. that allow you basically to just open the box, plug it in, and get started. This has proved to be very nice for some of the ePresence adopters, and also very nice for us, because frankly it's easier for us to support your software if we've configured it on hardware that we understand, and it's not just some weird video card, etc. And furthermore, there's something called ePresence Lite, in which you can basically carry a laptop and a webcam or a camera into a classroom and set it up and capture for archive and stream in Windows Media. And as of the version of this summer, you'll be able to stream in multiple formats. And so you're in effect an entire live e-learning production studio with, with a laptop and with a video camera. And this is really quite remarkable that you can do this with off-the-shelf hardware. Now, how do we get this out there? Well, ePresence Interactive Media consists of two pieces. There's ePresence Media, and that's the software for capturing, producing, and publishing rich media archives. In other words, if we were not doing a live webcast here, we could be using ePresence Media. And that comes totally free, not a penny, open source BSD style license. You can download it off our website. There's something, it's a little hard to measure how many people have downloaded it because it comes in multiple packages, but it's over 10,000 downloads already in about a year and a half. ePresence Live, which includes live webcasting and other advanced features, only comes with a consortium membership, and we have a revenue model based around that. The membership is very inexpensive. It's typically starts at $3,000 with an annual renewal fee. That's half of that. And this is what we're doing in the hope that we can keep the project going once the research money dries up in another 20 months or so. And that includes support, webcast training, and the annual conference. We have our second annual general meeting coming up in Toronto this June. Our first meeting last year had about 15 people face-to-face and about 15 people joining us by webcast. Needless to say, we use our own, I hate to use the word dog food, I never quite liked that metaphor, but we eat our own dog food and we use it as much as possible for everything. And these are the organizations that have currently joined the membership, and it's mainly in Canada, but about 6 different countries. It's mainly academic environments and medical schools, but includes increasingly a number of companies and other organizations as well. Now, how do you use this? Well, these are some of the applications that I want to briefly talk about, but the most important applications, again, because of the kinds of adopters, have been in education and medical education and continuing medical education. So, for example, the Center for Bioethics, which has worked together with the Center for eHealth Innovation in Toronto, has a very active website. And if you look here, these are talks, some of which happened only about a year or 15 months ago, which are pretty specialized talks having to do with issues in bioethics. And some of them has already been watched 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 times. And this is the Center for Global eHealth Innovation. This is the organization they're affiliated with. One of the early projects we did way back in 2001 was something called the Millennium Dialogue on Early Child Development. And this was a project in which there were 200 attendees in 6 local spaces at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, 20 plus remote attendees, and we did this with ePresence as we were building the technology. I don't quite understand how we pulled it off, but we pulled it off. And what was interesting was that even in the early days, because Dan Keating, the fellow who put on this conference, was very keen to get people talking. These were all his collaborators, his ex-students. There were 600 chat messages over the period of the 2 days. many of which, of course, had to do with technology. Can you hear okay? Many of which had to do with, hey, I see you out there, where are you going for dinner? But increasingly over the 4 half days, more and more of them had to do with, did you understand that? Go look at this URL. Things having to do with the substance. And this is something we're trying to continue. One of the things that came out of that project was the notion that, yes, you can do everything live webcast. Yes, you can publish a website. But in some cases, maybe you should take the proceedings of this and publish them to CDs or DVDs. And so there was a series of CDs, conversations on societies and child development, that were published essentially automatically out of that event. Another project we did about 3 years ago, together with Video Telephony, a company in Ottawa that we've worked with, and the Net North, was bridging a video conferencing using North Network's video conferencing network with ePresence webcasting in order to send out a briefing on the West Nile virus. And part of the conference was linking together 2 regional infectious disease experts who were located at different video conferencing hubs. There's over 300 such hubs now in Ontario, supported by whatever the new name for North Network is. But again, you can always bridge the audio-video signal and put it into ePresence and get it out. And this is a screen snap from that. You see no chapters there, but single-level table of contents on the left, and again, the timeline on the bottom, and one of the slides, one of the presenters trying to lighten up the proceedings a little bit. One of the things we tried about a year and a half ago was to pull off a Canada-wide class on collaboration technologies, on computer-supported collaborative work, with presenters located in a number of cities across Canada and students in seminar rooms in Toronto, Vancouver, and Halifax, and other attendees in various sites of North America. And we managed to pull it off with some of our early voice-over IP technology, but the importance of doing this better was what led us to some of the research work I'm going to talk about in a minute. And this brings me to the fourth and last part of the talk, which is the research directions. Okay, and so I'm going to talk about 4 pieces of work here. I'm going to talk about, first of all, how to get greater interactivity by integrating conferencing with webcasting, and the conferencing uses voice over IP technology. Secondly, how do you increase the awareness and sense of presence of people at these distributed sites with what we call an awareness server. Remember the early awareness server from Toronto that I showed you about 30 slides ago, and also with something called persistent chat, which I'm going to explain to you in a few minutes. And then finally, one of the important areas of our research is to see what we can do with the voice track, because that's really something that's underutilized in most ePresence and other similar applications. So let me go back. I made some reference to the distinctions between video conferencing and webcasting at the beginning. Let me strengthen that a little bit. Video conferencing, as you know, is symmetrical AV communication. It's highly interactive, but it's very dependent on internet bandwidth and thus not very scalable. And it typically involves a lot of setup. Webcasting is one-way broadcasting, typically from a source to many receivers. I've talked about the delay. It's very resilient in the face of vagaries of internet bandwidth. Not perfectly resilient. It is possible to kill a webcast. It's scalable. We can reach hundreds or thousands. And in principle, it's available from almost any place. I was in Key West recently, and we only had dial-up, and I was able to watch some ePresence events from from our home over dial-up. It wasn't great, but it was okay. We had actually recorded my mother-in-law's 80th birthday party and published that, and we were able to watch that several times from over dial-up from Key West. So this is a diagrammatic illustration of what I just said. Conferencing, symmetrical, highly interactive, small numbers, webcasting, asymmetrical, going outward, very large numbers from a sender to lots of receivers. Can you bridge these two? And the answer is yes. And let me show you that in a video.
This video presents a novel extension to the ePresence webcasting system developed based on our studies of presenter behavior in classroom situations. Video conferencing supports symmetrical multimedia communications at a distance among small numbers of individuals by high bandwidth connections. Webcasting uses multimedia streaming for a one-to-many transmission from a speaker to large numbers of participants over high and low speed connections. In webcasts, the amount of interaction with remote viewers is typically very limited. Video conferencing offers a much higher level of interactivity, but is constrained by high bandwidth requirements and poor scalability. Let's see how some of the advantages of video conferencing can be brought to ePresence, an open source webcasting infrastructure. To accomplish this, we use a remote viewing interface to increase the ability of remote participants to interact naturally in real time, and an in-room awareness display, which makes remote participants more visible to the speaker and local audience. Let's watch as a remote participant requests permission to speak. Colors allow the speaker and local audience to quickly identify those participants who are speaking or want to speak. Here, the participant is requesting permission to speak and is bordered red. The moderator grants the participant permission to speak, and he joins into a live voice conversation with the speaker and local audience. When he is speaking, a chat bubble appears over his in-room display representation. Also, questions, comments, and discussion can be sent to other remote participants and the local in-room display using a chat window. Interaction is more natural and easier for the speaker than text chat would be in webcasts without our system. Research is ongoing to bridge the interactivity gap that exists between local and remote audiences.
Okay, so this is the prototype that we used last term in these experiments. And so what you have here is the webcast video up here, controls that enable you to raise your hand and get permission to speak. The current remote speaker being shown here, all the remote viewers being shown here, and they can be visible. And this is very reminiscent of the what you saw in the Microsoft Telep display. They can be visible with a slow scan video transmission, with a static image, or with just no image whatsoever. You can see this enlarged here. The slides up here and the chat here, and I'll talk more about the persistent chat in a minute. This shows you what it's like in the class. This was the class I taught last term, my Business of Software class. So you see me talking to students at St. George. This was actually, these are not students, these are actually jurors in the front row. This was the final presentation where the best groups presented their business plans. And you can see here the awareness display. This is a diagram here, so the projection screen is behind me. The awareness display is up there, and the students are here. And this is what the awareness display looks like with indications of who's watching, plus the persistent chat. This image doesn't actually correspond to that image there, but that's all right. They were taken at two different times. So that gives you a sense of what we're showing among of the images of people, but another concept of, another aspect of our sense of awareness, and this comes out of an area called back-channel communications that's been discussed a lot in the CSCW literature, not a lot, but it's discussed a bit recently, is if with the images you see, you can see who's out there remotely. You can see like how many there are and who they are, but you have no idea of what they're thinking. the chat, in some sense, if it's used appropriately, can give you some sense of what people are thinking and what they're asking about. So one of the things we were interested in is making the chat visible to the lecturer. Now, you can't look at it very often if you're the lecturer, but occasionally, for example, if there was an awareness display, I could look up there, particularly if there were color-coded cues or something that said when there was a question. Or when I got to the end, I could immediately take a look at it and scroll and say, okay, I see here the questions that came out in real time during the lecture, as opposed to those that might be typed during the question period or whatever. So not only seeing the remote audience, but seeing something about what they're thinking, what their questions, comments, and perceptions is interesting. And so happily I had a master's student named David Fono who was interested in the notion of persistent chat. What is persistent? Persistent chat is chat that extends beyond the lifetime of the real-time conversation or the real-time webcast. And so if you have persistent chat over a webcast, then the comments timestamped get recorded with the webcast, and presumably if, for example, someone made a comment in response to something that I said 5 minutes ago saying, Baecker doesn't know what he's talking about, this is the truth, or, hey, Professor Baecker, you should know about X, somebody did this work, then in principle, people could carry on that discussion later over the archives as people watch archives. And we've seen evidence that for any webcast that's interesting, there could be hundreds or thousands of viewings eventually over the archives. And so the benefits of persistent chat could be quite significant. This is the research prototype that David Fono built for Backtalk. And so the idea is that these are labeled, but of course I forgot to write down what the labels mean. But basically this is the chat here. This is an attempt to display the chat graphically. That didn't work very well. There's the ability to tag the messages with color or size to make things more salient. So Michael Muller from IBM was actually on this conference, and either Michael Muller or somebody thought that this was a particularly important comment that people should pay attention to, and so somebody increased the size of it and made it in bright blue. And so this is very wiki-lite. Anybody can control the size and color of the messages, and we believe this is in the line of support for a learning community. So this is actually what it looks like in the context of e-presence. We've done away with some of David's ideas because we just didn't have room, or we didn't think we just didn't have room. But we did include the size and the color changes, which we think are very effective. So again, here you see remote users. This was another. We've been experimenting with different ways to make people visible, et cetera, et cetera. This was a different application of persistent chat done for a course called Communication Skills for Computer Scientists. A very innovative course taught, I think, only at U of T, although I hope Waterloo will have a course like this soon, or other computer science departments. Maybe you already do. This is a course that combines teaching writing and public speaking and interpersonal communications. And so one of the things we've done is we've taken a video camera into the course, taught by Lillian Bloom, and captured the students doing their public speaking, and using the persistent chat idea, had the teaching assistant making notes in real time that are time-stamped and linked to gestures and words that the students said, and then asking the students to go back and look at the comments from the TA. So you see here, Christopher Collins, the TA, says, you're looking down more on this attempt. Were you more nervous here? And Delia, the student, says, yes, I sort of lost my spot, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea is to encourage dialogue over the semester as the students improve in their communication skills and their speaking skills, and be able to let them look back over an entire semester of work. That's the first three topics, and I want to just briefly talk about the fourth topic. We're proud of what we've been able to do with archives, the structure, the navigability, the searchability, but it seemed interesting to think about what we could do about speech. And so Cosmin Munteanu has been working on a PhD on speech processing of voice recordings of lectures. You have to keep in mind that if you talk to a speech vendor and they give you a demo at a trade show, they will undoubtedly show you recordings or recognitions of a newscaster with mellifluous tones and perfect diction, sitting still with an excellent microphone in an anechoic chamber, talking about a vocabulary in which every 10th word is George Bush and every 20th word is Stephen Harper, and every 5th word is something or other, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, despite the fact that I'm not wandering from here today, most speakers are like me. They mumble. Most academics, they talk too fast. They have different vocabularies every week. We don't enunciate clearly, et cetera, et cetera. And speech recognition of lectures is much more difficult. And so Cosmin's first question was, well, how good is good enough? Let's say we can't do perfect. Let's say we could do 80%. Let's say we could do 20% word error rate or 40% word error rate. Would that be good enough? And then what can we do to improve the state of the art of voice transcription of lectures? And so Cosmin's first task then was a Wizard of Oz experiment in which he gave students in a task in which they had to go back and take 12-minute quizzes on archived lectures, 40-minute long lectures, so they couldn't listen to the entire thing. They had to browse and navigate and look selectively for things. He gave them 4 conditions: a perfect manual transcription with 0% word error rate, 25% word error rate, 45% word error rate, and no transcripts. And what he found was, basically, without trying to explain all these results in detail, was that if you could only do 45% word error rate, you might as well forget it. It wasn't going to, people wouldn't use it. But if you could do 25% word error rate, it was probably good enough to give people some benefit. Cosmin's current word error rate is about 50%. For most of the lectures, every term we record a different prof. Every term we have some new disaster about something we didn't anticipate about, like there was one prof, I won't say who we thought, this must be a wonderful instructor, no issue of strange accent, et cetera, et cetera. With this particular prof, speaks 8,000 words a minute. 8,000 words a minute. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So, meanwhile, Cosmin is experimenting with improving the language models, in part by making use of auxiliary information. So if you're trying to improve the language model and the lecture is on webcasting, well, certainly you're going to get some help by looking at the slides of the talk, but you might also get some help by crawling the web, looking for documents that have to do with webcasting or for books or things like that. And this is giving us some help, but not as much as we would have liked. And so the other thing that Cosmin's been doing right now is asking the question, can you get students who presumably would benefit from having good transcripts that they could look at from lectures, can you get them help fix up the noisy transcripts? And so far the answer is no, they're not actually too eager to help you, but we have a nice interface to help them help. And that's what's shown here. And as you're listening to something, if either through the goodness of your heart or through various incentives, it is very easy for you to fix up to fix up the transcript and make it better. One of the things about transcripts that transcript now is not a first-class citizen in ePresence. We're going to make it so at one point because My feeling is that for certain talks, probably not Ron Baecker coming to Waterloo, but like we at Vint and Surf at Toronto recently, or you know, I mean, let's say someone's won a Turing Award or someone's won a Nobel Prize. Okay, and let's say you treat them really nicely and you give them a huge honorarium and et cetera, et cetera. Well, you could probably afford to transcribe their lecture. What does it cost to, I mean, you can hire a high school kid to transcribe an hour of text for about $100. You can farm it out over the internet to some individual in Australia who will bid on it and will say, yes, I'll give you a transcript back for $60 within 24 hours. So there ought to be more transcripts available for talks that are of real value for these archives. And one of the reasons there's been little call for it, I think, is because, in fact, for people who use slides, our hierarchical, navigable, structured, searchable archives are pretty good. Finally, and we have done a little bit of this at Toronto, but hopefully others here and other places will do more of it. We need innovations in pedagogy. So, for example, the work that we've been doing with the use of persistent chat in the public speaking component of the course is a really interesting use of archived media and persistent media. In the business of software class, typically, and I've been doing this in the class for 20 years, I have guest entrepreneurs. Historically, they've all been from Toronto. This term, I had my second cousin, who's a very brilliant and very successful entrepreneur, even at age 30, from Pasadena, California. He was a guest entrepreneur from his home. T.J. Kang used to work for me at Toronto as a company called Think Free in Seoul, Korea. He was a guest entrepreneur from his office desktop in Seoul, Korea. And so we can broaden the educational resources and experiences in ways that we have not done before. And so the message is webcasting is a viable technology, still lots of research to do, very important applications, but a great need to do more research in pedagogy, and I look forward to taking your questions and talking to you over the next, I guess I'm here till 5 o'clock tomorrow for various purposes. So thank you.
Thank you. And what we'll do is get the microphone to you from one side or the other so you can get recorded. Questions, comments?
So you mentioned that you wanted to engage students, and your software seems to have a lot of functionality, a lot of features, and it seems that a lot of your features would kind of split the attention of your students or your users of the system. So when you're adding new features, how do you go about deciding, okay, is this going to be more beneficial, or is it going to split the attention of the user in such a way that will distract them? Okay.
That's a good question. We, despite what despite what I teach as a human-computer interaction prof, we do not do a lot of formal user testing because, in fact, the combinatorics of it are so huge. So our primary method is to try everything ourselves first, to use ourselves as guinea pigs, and then to get as much feedback as we can from our adopters to decide whether, in fact, something we've put in is valuable. We think long and hard before putting in new. I mean, before putting in new, and we try not to add a lot of bells and whistles. So we try to keep the functionality as minimal as possible. But you're absolutely right. There are issues of attention, and I mentioned that there are a number of people involved in research underlying ePresence through Nectar. Professor Elaine Toms, you saw her picture on slide 3. She has a student whose name, of course, I'm going to block right now, who's doing a PhD on issues of attention and engagement. So these are very, very serious issues. There are people who watch webcasts partly because they want to not attend perfectly. Okay, they want to be able to multitask. But if in a classroom situation you really want to get as much attention as possible.
I want to follow up on his question a bit and ask how this system actually changes the dynamics for all the participants involved. So you had that one slide where you had, your talk behind you, but then you had the awareness projection there, and it seemed that could be a bit of a distraction. But I mean, in your experiences, from the audience perspective and from your perspective as a presenter, how has it changed the dynamics of the environment?
Okay, that's a very good question. I taught with that last term in the business of software class, and what it did is it made me occasionally pay attention to the remote audience, which was the group of, in theory, 14, but in practice 6 to 8, who would show up at the University of Toronto Mississauga site. I think that and that meant that I was, in those times, paying a little less attention to the local students I was teaching at St. George. I think that was a reasonable trade-off because in theory, and we've asked the university to give us some money to do a longer test, whether they will or not remains to be seen. In theory, this allows scarce educational resources to be applied more broadly than if you force students to, students at the Toronto, at the Mississauga and Scarborough campuses spend about 2.5 hours, including an hour each way on the bus, in order to access 3rd and 4th year courses on the downtown campus. So I think for distributed situations like that, it's worthwhile. I didn't find it a significant distraction. In fact, it's very hard to get people to speak up at either site, I found. So I would really have to work. And we had class participation marks, and I would have to remind the students in Mississauga, by the way, you're getting participation marks and your TA is there and she could see who's speaking, so please ask me a question. But Toronto students they like to sit there and they don't ask very much. So we found that we had a better experience with this kind of display than they did at Microsoft with the TELEP system.
So I'm a bit interested in your experience with how people regard the objects they've created, the webcasts or even transcripts of more video conference type things. You showed the slide of some of the medical ones being used hundreds of times. And I guess I'm kind of curious why, I can see why people in different communities keep these things separate, but if they're all together in some e-presence enthusiast site or something, it'd be interesting what cross-fertilization or ideas people steal from each other. So how do people regard this stuff? Do they want to keep it closed?
Most of the archives we know about are publicly available. Some of the medical ones are not, for reasons of either patient confidentiality or because they view it as something that their med students have paid for and they don't want other people to access it or whatever. We will be releasing in the next couple months the worldwide ePresence media portal. I'm not sure that's what it's going to be called, but our home page, epresence.tv, is being redesigned to give equal prominence for software and media resources. Call it our response to YouTube or whatever. Our hope is that increasingly there will be this kind of cross-fertilization. But I don't know I don't really know a good answer to your question because we haven't asked our users enough. But come to our annual meeting and ask the question, or someone from there are 2 ePresence licensees at the moment at Waterloo, Dominic's group and LT3, I guess, and we're hoping they'll be very active in the meeting coming up in June.
So you had mentioned that one of the advantages of video conferencing is that you have more of a symmetrical interaction, but with webcasting you have the ability to reach a much larger audience. And it seems that you attempted to combine some of those, the best features of both into ePresence. Have you had experience with very large numbers of audiences? Because I'm wondering about issues of scalability in terms of some of the interaction design issues. So if you have a chat transcript and you have hundreds or say, thousands of people, how are you going to be able to filter out what's the relevant information?
Yeah, good question. Okay, first of all, the merger of conferencing and webcasting, what I've shown you here is a laboratory prototype, and it is our intention that the first time this gets released on a wider scale is in the new version, either 3.4 or 4.0 that's going to come out this summer. In terms of scalability, Peter says thousands. The most we've ever done is 70. We know of one case where it was tried with 150 last week, where there was a problem. So we don't have a lot of evidence. Peter has a simulator that allows him to simulate larger loads, and that plus his confidence in his coding abilities, and he is probably the most brilliant architect and coder I've ever seen, give us reason to believe we can scale it to very large numbers. What it would be like with 1,000 people on with large-scale use of chat, I really don't know. We just have not tried it. And clearly there's a need for filtering. That's part of what David was experimenting with in back talk, the notion of coding stuff by sender, by color, which is supposed to be category, used for category, and by size for importance could be a help, but we don't have a lot of experience with that yet.
Any other? I'll make sure I take anybody's question. I just want to mention that Doug and Anthony and Dave Chillis are here today, and we are doing every possible time we can ePresence, at least to archive talks, if not to webcast them. And I wonder if they have any comments on the challenge of doing this. I know it's a huge amount of work to carry these things off, and I don't know, Doug, can I put you on the spot a little bit?
Well, I wrote down a list of questions before the seminar, and I won't bring them all up. I think we're getting together at some point. But my question is complexity. We really struggle with it because everything you see here, the microphones, the lights, the cameras, are all because of some need. Dominic said filament. And, okay, so we need a camera. Started with a camera, it's too dark. Got some lights. No sound, we need the audio. And now we have a 16-channel sound mixer back there, a 4-port video switcher. The little movie you had in your talk went out live through the video port. That was a capability now, it's kind of cool. But it takes 16 hands to run this stuff, an hour to set up, an hour to take down. It's a bit much. There's not much we can do about the need to turn on lights if you want to light the speaker well, or about the issues of miking people. And the things we struggle with the most, and the thing we've struggled with the most in the conferencing editions is audio quality and audio feedback, et cetera, et cetera. We have been working intensively in trying to simplify the software for normal use so that sort of the basic settings can be set once, and if you're going to do the same thing over and over again, you just come in and plug it in and say start it up. And 3.3 was better than 3.2. My understanding is you're using 3.1? 3.2, yeah. 3.3 is significantly better than 3.2, and 3.4 is going to significantly be better than 3.3. And we know that every upgrade takes time, and so we're not saying you should upgrade at every time, but we are trying to simplify the software as much as possible so that, again, if you can do things, if you want to do things over and over again, it's straightforward. And if you want to tune parameters,
There's a lot of complicated technology under the hood in terms of streaming engines, in terms of bit rates, in terms of et cetera, et cetera. It is non-trivial. And on the other hand, if all you want to, if you're not going to do the live webcasting, if all you're going to do is capture and publish, that is a lot simpler. And
I guess the big message, though, is that there is a human resource backing necessary for this. That it's more than wiring a room. Even it's an incorporation. And maybe that's one of the barriers to its greater adoption. I wonder why we don't have more courses that are offered over the mechanism and give students the opportunity to participate in other cities. We've talked about multi-campus PhD programs and so on, but it seems to me we still have a fair amount of manual technology that's necessary to make it happen, and maybe one of the barriers.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to find out, I'd like to talk again to the Berkeley folks and really see is there something they've done that we haven't, that makes it, seems that they claim they can run it with so little people power. But partly it's the fact they have a number of classrooms. I don't know what they do about lighting. Maybe they accept. I wouldn't mind as a speaker if I was in shadow. If I wasn't lit perfectly. So if you had these cameras under robotic cameras, then that would reduce the reduce the manpower somewhat. So
thank you very much. It was very enjoyable to talk.